Rena had never imagined herself marrying someone old enough to be her grandfather. But life doesn't exactly hand you roses when you grow up sleeping on the floor of a tin-roof shack and counting coins just to eat rice. She was 22, pretty, in that soft girl-next-door kind of way, with big dreams and empty pockets. Mr. Harold Whitmore, on the other hand, was 70, rich beyond belief, quiet, mysterious, his suits always crisp, his watch worth more than her entire life. No children, no family, just a cold mansion up on the hill with more rooms than purpose. They met at a charity event, one of those fake smile. Guileless, where rich people pretend to care. Rena wasn't even supposed to be there. She was catering, carrying a silver tray of champagne flutes when she tripped and spilled the drink all over Mr. Whitmore's shoes. He didn't yell, didn't even blink, just looked at her with those deep, unreadable eyes and said, "No need to worry, darling. Everyone deserves a little accident." 3 weeks later, he proposed. It wasn't love. Let's be real. It was survival. Rena told herself she'd stay for a year, maybe 2. Smile pretty, learn how to play rich, then disappear with whatever money she could quietly tuck away. He had no prenuptial agreement, just a small, weird clause in the marriage papers, no entry into the cellar without permission. She didn't even think twice about it. The wedding was quick, small and awkward. No friends, no family, just a priest, a lawyer and a photographer who looked more like a spy than someone capturing memories. Harold kissed her on the cheek. His lips were dry, almost cold. 10 days in, she was already dying of boredom. The mansion was beautiful, but lifeless. No music, no laughter. Harold had a strict routine. Breakfast at 6 a.m. sharp, afternoon walks at 3, dinner at 7, lights out by 9. No exceptions. He barely touched her, barely spoke unless it was about weather, finance, or the importance of discipline, but something wasn't right. She noticed it on day 4. At night, when Harold was supposedly asleep, she heard footsteps, soft, careful ones, moving downstairs. She followed once, tiptoeing across the marble floor, but the sound vanished near the cellar door. Locked, of course, always locked. On day 7, the housekeeper, an old woman with shaking hands, grabbed her wrist suddenly and whispered, "Don't go down there. Ever." Then she shuffled away like she hadn't said anything at all. By day 10, Rena had had enough. Curiosity was clawing at her brain like a caged animal. Harold had gone to the city for a board meeting. He wouldn't be back until morning. She knew this was her only chance. She found the keys in his study drawer, hidden under a false bottom, like something straight out of a movie. Her heart was pounding. She wasn't even sure why she felt scared. It was just a cellar, right? The lock clicked. The heavy door creaked open, releasing a cold gust of air that smelled like dust and something else. Something sweet, almost rotten. She took the first step, then another, and that's when she saw it. At the bottom of the stairs, dimly lit by a single flickering bulb, stood a door, steel, bolted from the outside, and scratched, like something or someone had been trying to get out. Rena froze halfway down the cellar stairs, one hand gripping the rusted banister, the other still clutching the heavy ring of keys. Her eyes were locked on that steel door. Those deep claw marks, the warped metal at the bottom, like something had been pushing or crawling from inside. The air was thick, colder than the rest of the house, and that strange, sweet, rotten smell was stronger now, like perfume gone bad. She wanted to turn back. Every instinct in her was screaming to shut the door and pretend she'd never been there. But it was too late for that. Curiosity had already sunk its teeth into her, and the moment she reached the bottom step, something changed. The lights flickered, then they went out. Darkness swallowed everything. Rena let out a sharp breath, panic, flaring in her chest. She fumbled for her phone, the flashlight shaking in her trembling hands. When the beam landed on the steel door again, her stomach twisted. The scratches were fresh. She inched forward, her steps slow and hesitant. There was a keypad next to the steel door. High-tech, way too advanced for just a wine cellar or old storage. The keys were worn, some more than others. Someone had been using it. Often. She tried typing in Harold's birthday. Nothing. Their wedding date? Nope. Then she tried the number she'd seen on the framed certificate in his office, 1946. The light on the keypad blinked green. The lock clicked. "Please don't do this," she whispered to herself, her voice barely audible over her racing heart. She pulled the door open slowly, just enough to peek inside. The room was cold. Sterile. Too clean. The walls were lined with white tiles, like a hospital or a lab. There was a single bed in the center with straps, leather restraints at the wrists and ankles. Monitors on the wall beeped softly, tracking heart rate, oxygen, brain waves, and on that bed was a girl. Or something that looked like a girl. She was hooked up to tubes and wires, motionless but breathing. Her skin was pale, almost blue. Her eyes were closed, lashes dark and long, and her hair fell in messy black strands over her face. But what made Rena's blood run cold was her face, because it looked exactly like hers, identical. She stepped back, almost falling over, her brain screaming to make sense of it. A clone, a twin. Was this some sick experiment? Why was this girl hidden away? Suddenly, a monitor blared. The girl's heart rate spiked. Her eyes opened, wide, black, not human. Rena turned to run, but a hand clamped down on her shoulder, strong, bony. She screamed, and behind her, Harold stood, calm, pale, his eyes sunken like he hadn't slept in weeks. "I told you not to go down here," he said softly, almost like a disappointed parent. "Now you've ruined everything." Rena couldn't move. Her body froze under Harold's grip, not because he was holding her that tightly, but because of the way he looked at her. There was no anger, no panic, just sadness, like he'd known this moment was coming, like he'd expected her to disobey. She tried to speak, but the words got stuck in her throat. Behind her, the clone, copy thing that looked exactly like her, was still watching, its black eyes blinking slowly, unnaturally. I don't understand," Rena finally stammered. "What is she? Who is she?" Harold let go of her shoulder. He walked past her slowly, like his bones hurt, and stood beside the bed. He placed a hand on the girl's forehead with eerie tenderness. "She's you," he said, "but better." Rena's heart dropped. "What the hell does that mean?" "I made her before I met you," he continued, as if he were telling her what he had for breakfast. "Took years, decades of research. I spent everything I had trying to build her. I needed the right mind, the right face, the right soul. But souls," he sighed, tapping a monitor, "souls are stubborn things." He turned to Rena, and for the first time since they'd met, his eyes showed something raw, desperate. "You were the missing piece." Her stomach churned. "You married me to steal my soul." "It's not stealing, it's sharing. You were chosen. Don't you see? You're not poor, not worthless, not forgotten. You're the prototype, the blueprint for perfection." Rena backed up toward the door. "You're insane." "That's what they said in Geneva, in Berlin. The institute in Zurich revoked my license." He chuckled. "Fools! They couldn't see what I was building, what humanity could become." The girl in the bed blinked again. Her lips twitched. She looked like she was trying to speak or mimic. Her eyes darted between Rena and Harold, then back again. Rena's knees felt weak. "I don't want any part of this," she said, barely above a whisper, but Harold stepped between her and the exit. "You already are. That's the problem." Then, without warning, the lights above them shut off. Again, not flickered, not dimmed, cut. Everything went pitch black, and then came the sound, a low, wet creak, like rubber being peeled. The monitor flatlined. Something was moving in the darkness. "Harold," Rena whispered. "What's happening?" Silence. "Harold!" Suddenly a light buzzed back on. Only one, the emergency light above the bed. It flickered, revealing the straps were empty, the bed was empty. And Harold wasn't beside her anymore, but the door was wide open and a soft, shuffling breath came from behind her. Rena didn't even look back. She ran up the cellar stairs, her bare feet slapping against the cold stone, her breath ragged and sharp. She didn't care where she was going, just away. From the bed, from the dark, from the thing that wore her face. But no matter how fast she moved, she could hear it behind her. Not footsteps, dragging, like something that hadn't quite learned how to walk. She burst into the main hallway of the mansion, slamming the cellar door shut behind her. She locked it, then jammed one of Harold's old walking canes through the door handles just in case. The house was silent. Too silent. "Harold!" she screamed, though she already knew there would be no answer. She grabbed her phone and ran to the front door. No signal, of course. She yanked at the lock. It wouldn't budge. Then she remembered. Harold controlled the house. From his study, everything, doors, lights, even temperature, was wired through a custom smart system. He once joked that it made him feel like God. Now she was trapped in his kingdom. She sprinted to his office, nearly slipping on the polished floor. The door was open. The room was dark except for the eerie glow of monitors on the far wall. One showed the cellar camera, static. Another showed the hallway, empty. Then the screen flickered. The camera feed now showed the living room and her clone. Standing still in the center, eyes wide, head tilted slightly, studying everything. Rena covered her mouth. Her hands were shaking as she clicked through the system. No response. Everything was locked. She couldn't override it without Harold's biometric code, and Harold was nowhere. Dead, missing. She didn't care. She had to escape. Suddenly, the hallway feed changed. The clone was gone. Then, thump. Something hit the door behind her. She spun. Nothing. Then the doorknob turned. Slowly, she backed up. There were no weapons, nothing useful, just books, pens, and Harold's antique letter opener. She grabbed it. Pathetic, but better than nothing. The knob stopped turning. Silence. Then she heard a sound that froze her blood. A voice. Soft. Broken. Rena. It wasn't Harold's. It was hers, coming from behind the door. "Let me in. I'm you. Don't you want to know what I remember?" Her heart slammed into her ribs. "You can't stay up here forever." The voice continued. "He made me to replace you, but I remember your pain, your hunger, your father's belt, your mother's silence. I remember your nightmares." Rena collapsed into the chair, pressing her back against the desk. "How do you know that?" she whispered. "Because I am you," the voice said. Then the lights flickered again. Every screen shut off, and something slammed into the door so hard the frame cracked. The clone wasn't mimicking anymore. She was hunting. The door was cracking. Splinters flew from the frame with each blow, the force behind them way too strong. For something that looked like a girl, Rena held the letter opener like it was a sword, her whole body trembling, adrenaline pushing her past fear into something colder, survival. She needed to move, fast. The office had a side entrance, rarely used, hidden behind a bookshelf. Harold once showed her as a clever architectural detail. At the time, it was a charming old man flex. Now, it was the only thing keeping her alive. She rushed to the shelf, pulled the lever hidden behind a faux dictionary, and the wood groaned open, just as another slam shook the door behind her. She squeezed through the opening and shut it just in time to hear the main door snap off its hinges and crash to the floor. Her clone had entered the room. The passage was tight and narrow, barely lit. It smelled like dust and mold, like it hadn't been touched in years. But it led somewhere. Downstairs, she thought, somewhere deeper, somewhere worse. Anywhere's better than here, she muttered. She didn't realize she was crying until the tears blurred her vision. She stumbled down the narrow stairs, barely able to see. Behind her, she heard the faint echo of footsteps. No more dragging, no more slow movements. The clone had adapted. It was learning. At the end of the passage, she found another heavy door, marked Lobby 2, defunct. Her hand shook as she opened it, expecting more horror, but what she saw wasn't terror, it was answers. The room was filled with screens, all offline. Data servers buzzed weakly. Old computers blinked in standby mode. But the real horror was on the walls. Photos of her, dozens, hundreds, every angle, every emotion, from childhood to adulthood. Some she'd never seen before, couldn't have seen before. One photo showed her crying in the alley behind the diner she worked at, back when she'd just turned 19 and her manager had screamed at her for dropping a plate. No one else had been there. Another showed her sleeping in her mother's apartment when she was 16. That apartment had no windows, no cameras, but someone had been watching. He'd been watching for years. Suddenly, something flickered to life behind her, a video, an old one. Harold stood in front of a surgical table, speaking to the camera. Subject 14 has failed. Neural activity remains erratic. Emotional data corrupted. She tried to mimic empathy, but it was empty. Hollow. I must find the original, the source. The pain must be real for the design to work. Then came a flash of static. A new clip played. Harold again, older, his voice slower. I've found her. Her name is Rena. Her trauma is pure, untouched, organic. She's perfect. I'll bring her here. She won't suspect a thing. She'll fall for the story. They always do. Rena's legs gave out. She fell to her knees, bile rising in her throat. This wasn't about a clone. This was about breaking her, feeding off her misery to build something that could feel, that could replace real humans. Harold had never loved her, never even needed her. She was just a fuel source, a test tube of pain. Behind her, a soft voice echoed down the hall. Found. You. She turned slowly and saw herself, her clone, standing in the doorway. Eyes black, lips curled into a crooked, knowing smile. You're not the only one who hurts, Rena, it said. Then it stepped forward, one hand holding something, Harold's severed ID thumbprint. The clone stepped into the room with slow, deliberate movements. It wasn't dragging anymore. It wasn't stumbling. It was confident now, controlled, upgraded. Rena's breath caught in her throat as her eyes locked on the severed thumb in its hand. Harold's, blood still wet, trailing down its pale fingers like war paint. She couldn't look away. You killed him, Rena whispered. The clone cocked its head. He served his purpose, just like you did. Its voice had changed, less broken, more balanced. It was adjusting to her speech patterns, mimicking her tone, her words, becoming her. Why are you doing this? Rena backed away, inching toward the wall where a rusted emergency axe hung behind glass. The clone watched her, but didn't move to stop her. Because pain builds perfection. I'm your evolution. I'm the version of you that doesn't cry, doesn't beg, doesn't need. You broke. I learned. It smiled, a sick, uncanny replica of her own smile. I don't want to be perfect, Rena snapped. I want to be free. She shattered the glass with her elbow and yanked the axe out. It was heavier than she expected, the weight unfamiliar in her shaking hands. The clone took one step closer. You're not going to hurt me. You sure? Rena raised the axe. The clone moved fast. Unnaturally fast. It lunged, grabbing the axe mid-swing with one hand, yanking Rena forward and slamming her into the wall. Stars exploded behind her eyes. The axe clattered to the floor. You can't kill what's already built better, the clone whispered in her ear. You're the past. I'm the next version. But it underestimated her. Rena reached into her back pocket, pulling out the small letter opener she'd stashed, and stabbed it straight into the clone's eye. The clone screamed, a horrible metallic screech that vibrated through the room like a broken machine screaming in agony. It stumbled back, sparks and thick black fluid pouring from its face. Rena didn't wait. She grabbed the axe off the floor and swung. The blade connected with its shoulder, knocking it into a stack of metal shelves. Equipment crashed to the floor. Sparks flew, but it wasn't dead. It growled, low, distorted, animalistic, and charged. Rena dove behind the table, hitting a panel on the wall with her elbow. It was marked Security Override, Emergency Access Only. The panel slid open, revealing a scanner. She grabbed the severed thumb the clone had dropped. Hesitating only a second, she pressed it to the reader. It beeped. Access granted. A door slid open behind her, revealing a narrow lift. She jumped in just as the clone launched itself across the room. The doors slammed shut. Rena collapsed to the floor, breathing hard, her body shaking, blood on her hands, some of it hers, some of it not. The elevator began to rise. She didn't know where it was taking her. She didn't care. All that mattered was that she was alive. But somewhere deep beneath her, she could still hear the clone's scream, and it didn't sound like it had lost. It sounded like it was waiting. The elevator climbed for what felt like forever, groaning and clanking with every floor. It passed. Rena sat on the cold metal floor, her back against the wall, Harold's blood drying on her hands. Her thoughts were spiraling. Why her? Why this? But most of all, what was waiting for her at the top? When the elevator finally stopped, the doors opened with a sharp hiss. She stood slowly, gripping the axe tightly, every part of her aching. The room she stepped into wasn't what she expected. It wasn't the mansion. It wasn't even the surface. It was a viewing room, white floors, black mirrors lining the walls, and on the far end, a wide observation window, looking down into what seemed like another replica of her old life, a perfectly constructed mock-up of the slum she grew up in, the shack, the alley behind the diner, her mother's run-down apartment. Every detail was exact. Rena's blood ran cold. On the console next to the glass was a label, Project Mirror 01, Real-Time Memory Loop Simulation, Subject Status, Live. She stared down into the simulation and froze. She was in it. Another Rena, lifting dishes at the diner, walking home, crying in the alley, washing her face in a cracked mirror. "What the hell is this?" she whispered. Then a voice crackled over the speakers. It was Harold, pre-recorded, calm, steady. "If you're hearing this, it means the clone has activated early. That's unfortunate, but expected." Rena stepped closer to the console, shaking. "You were always part of the equation, Rena. You were the seed. But evolution requires sacrifice. Pain is data. Emotion is code. Every hurt you endured became a line in her programming." She slammed her fist on the console. "Shut up!" But the message kept playing. She doesn't want to kill you. She wants to absorb you, become the final version. Once she does, we won't need pain anymore. We'll have perfection. Rena shook her head violently. "I'm not just pain. I'm human!" Suddenly the console beeped. Intrusion detected. Subject has breached shaft. No, 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 no. She turned, just as the ceiling vent above the room creaked open, and then a hand, dripping, burned, but still alive. The clone dropped into the room with a heavy thud, half her face still torn, the eye sockets sparking, the other eye wide and angry. "I told you I'd find you," she hissed. Rena didn't scream. She just raised the axe again. "I'm done running." The clone moved fast, but this time Rena didn't hesitate. She ducked the first swing, then slammed the axe into the clone's side. Sparks flew. Fluid sprayed, but the clone didn't fall. It grabbed her throat, lifting her clean. Off the ground, Rena kicked, scratched, clawed, but its grip was iron. "I don't need you anymore," the clone said. Then something in Rena snapped. She reached down, grabbing the emergency shock baton clipped to the security wall. She jabbed it directly into the exposed wiring on the clone's neck. A scream tore through the room, high-pitched, inhuman. The clone convulsed violently, dropping her. Rena fell to the floor, coughing as the clone stumbled backward, twitching, then crashing through the observation glass, falling into the simulation room below. Rena crawled to the broken edge, peering over. The clone landed hard, limp, smoking. She wasn't moving, but her eyes were open, still watching. The clone's body lay crumpled in the middle of the fake slum below, surrounded by flickering lights and the broken simulation of Rena's childhood. Her limbs twitched weakly. Black fluid oozed from the gash in her side, short-circuiting her. System 1, spark at a time, but those eyes, still open, still watching. Rena stayed on her knees, staring down through the shattered observation window. She didn't feel victory, didn't feel safe. She felt empty, because it was never just about escaping. It was about why she was here in the first place. Behind her, the console beeped again. She turned slowly, expecting another warning, maybe one final insult from Harold beyond the grave. But instead, a hidden drawer slid open. Inside was a flash. Drive labeled Truth for Rena. Her fingers shook as she picked it up and slotted it into the console. A video file blinked onto the screen. Harold appeared again, but this time he looked broken, tired. Less the monster, more the man who had already accepted he was going to die. "If you're seeing this," he said quietly, "then I've failed. Or she's killed me. Maybe both." He laughed bitterly. "I was never trying to replace you, Rena. I was trying to preserve you." Rena frowned. Her grip on the console tightened. The world outside this mansion is gone. What? The war happened fast. Bioweapons. AI collapse. The government fell. Humanity fractured. You were in a coma when I found you, starving, barely alive in the rubble. I kept you alive the only way I knew how, by copying what was left of your mind before it broke completely. Rena's breath hitched. "No," she whispered. "You're not the original Rena," Harold said. "You're the last version. That worked. The others all fell apart, emotionally unstable, suicidal. But you survived." Her legs nearly gave out. He continued, "I built this place to test you, to keep refining. I told myself it was mercy, but in truth, I just wanted one thing to remain real in a world that wasn't." The screen went black. Rena stood in silence, the truth ripping through her brain like wildfire. Her memories, her childhood, her struggles, all fabricated, planted to give her a sense of self, a believable pain to make her human. She turned slowly, looking down at the clone below. It wasn't the copy. She was, and now she was the only one left. She slid to the floor, staring at her hands. They shook, but not from fear anymore, from clarity, from knowing she was no longer someone else's project. She was free now. But freedom didn't feel like salvation. It felt like a question. What happens now? She looked at the emergency exit hatch on the far wall, the one marked Surface Biolock Required. She stepped toward it, pressed her hand to the scanner. It blinked red, DNA unrecognized. Of course, she walked back to the edge of the broken glass, staring down at the twitching, ruined clone below. They shared the same body, same face, same code, but only one of them had Harold's kill switch, embedded inside the clone. Rena exhaled slowly. "I'm sorry," she whispered. Then she climbed down into the simulation room, her footsteps echoing through the false streets of her stolen childhood. The clone looked up, barely conscious, her lips trembling. "You finally get it, don't you?" it whispered. "We were never meant to win, just suffer." Rena knelt beside her, took her hand, and for the first time, neither of them looked like a monster. They just looked tired. 1 minute later, the emergency door to the surface blinked green. It opened with a hiss, light poured through the corridor, and Rena stepped out into the ruins of a dead world, carrying the memories of a life that never belonged to her. But this one was hers.